Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 PM GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net. Good evening, welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight we're going to talk about an apocalyptic death cult unleashed on planet Earth. Well, no change there then. The show's also known as Your Shadow Government Explained. Do you remember in the 1980s? There was a TV series called V, and these huge spaceships orbited the planet over every major city in the world. And when they did communicate, it was in the languages of each country through the UN. And the visitors met with world leaders, again through the UN. These people were called the visitors. And the visitors were in fact lizard-like aliens who hid behind human-like masks. Now, those implementing the policies to take away your rights and force you into perpetual debt and poverty use their own language. Do you see where I'm going here? Okay, it's a bit of a loose connection. But it's quite an interesting one in the respect that when these aliens hovered over planet Earth, the first people they contacted was the UN, and the UN contacted every country in the world, and they relayed this information through these people called the visitors. Well, we talk about this global action plan all the time, and it's actually not that different because there's a lot of people in the world who just don't believe this is happening. And it's not a conspiracy, it's a 42-chapter document. But the useful idiots of the UN spout a language which makes everything sound acceptable. Have you heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs? Well, they talk of global governance through an environmental system which is totalitarian and has nothing to do with the environment apart from controlling all land and infrastructure which affects all people on Earth. Now, that does sound a bit like a dystopian nightmare, but we've covered this in so many shows, and more people are finding out about it because it's global and it's implemented locally. And people are starting to see this. It doesn't matter whether it's regeneration or whether it's these draconian policies implemented through local councils. Well, they're not actually through local councils. It's much bigger than that. But basically, it's a land grab and depopulation program through the World Bank. Now, in this fictional TV series of the 80s, V, they recently revived it. These visitors actually recruited children to spy on their parents, and they gathered intelligence on any signs of dissent. This is exactly what's going on in your local neighbourhood. This sort of Stasi mentality, we've covered that in a lot of shows, and it really is shocking. We did a show a while ago called Communist Kiddie Police, where the state are actually using children to spy not only on their parents, but on anybody else in the so-called community. You know, those vibrant communities, the ones we live in, those vibrant communities that are in fact a monoculture. Well, the Global Action Plan and Sustainable Development Goals of the UN are not in reality that different. World population is to be reduced drastically, all land and infrastructure strictly managed, restriction on everything and rationing for all. Populations are going to be forced into smart cities by 2050, but many want it all done by 2030. Now, the likes of Theresa May licked the boots of the totalitarian system by declaring a climate emergency and adopting all terms of Agenda 2030 before creeping off to her backstage gravy train. Now, all this is enforced on the back of environmentalism, which has nothing to do with the real goals of the UN, because there's the real goals the stated goals and the real goals. The real goals are behind the stated goals, and they're really not on view because they're about the totalitarianism. But everything has to be offered to the public in the form of a benefit. So in other words, we're saving the planet. You're getting taxed to death. It's good for you. It's going to kill you. This is the sort of thing I'm talking about. This is why I want to compare it to a dystopian sci-fi series of the 80s. A lot of those films in the 80s, actually, and 70s were quite prophetic. Do you remember Soylent Green, where they killed everything on the planet and they were living off the plankton, then the plankton all died. And basically people got put down when they were no use. Well, yes, that's all happening. Actually, they call it the Liverpool Care Pathway. They've changed the name of it now. So, world citizens, you are in danger of losing your minds to groupthink and consensus implemented by agents of change and all for profit, control and taxation purposes only. We will follow up this broadcast with a show on what are known as the enablers for achieving Agenda 2030. Now, this came out of the it was a Global Governance Summit. Global Governance Summit, which was held earlier this year. And some of the language they use in there is absolutely dystopian. So we're going to do a show on that. So you can tell your friends that it's not a conspiracy theory. But first, we've had a great week. And last Saturday, I was in Glastonbury doing the Glastonbury Symposium, giving a talk there called The Bigger Picture, which we take on the road and also features Sandy Adams and, of course, Piers Corbyn. And we can do these talks in your local area. More and more people are booking them, actually, because more and more people are aware of what is going on locally. In other words, the Global Local Action Plan, or Glocalism. Now, Sandy's just come back from a talk in... Where was it, Sandy?
It was Norfolk.
It was Norfolk.
Norfolk, near King's Lynn, yeah. It was the Harlequin Festival. And it's a lovely, lovely little festival out in the middle of nowhere. Very, very, difficult to find because they don't want to make it too big. And it was just really friendly and full of very switched on people. It was all about environmentalism, recycling. They'd got it all right, but they got, I was speaking in the talk space there.
Yes.
And they seem to totally understand the difference between what's really happening in the Green Party that we have now, which is a kind of fake green, corporatist green, and they understood that there was a difference between real environmentalism and real green policies, and the real green environmentalists that we used to have in the Ecology Party, and what's happened and how it's been hijacked by the globalists to create this Agenda 21 dystopian nightmare that we talk about. And I think 5G's switched it on an awful lot because they're beginning to see the difference between the 5G, which seems to be supported by the smart cities and the smart city agenda, and all the tech agenda seems to be supported by the Green Party that we have now. And it's interesting that now they're trying to control the narrative because in Stroud they're now opening up a Extinction Rebellion and now opening up their own 5G group.
We're going to get onto that a bit later because it's so important. It's a big part of this show.
Yeah.
In other words, what this is about is controlling the narrative of public opinion. That's all you need to remember. In actual fact, there's a few phrases. Remember that the globalists need the anti-globalists to implement their policies. The anti-globalists have nothing to do, and the globalists need the anti-globalists to steer and promote their agendas, which is basically called controlling the narrative. And that's very simply how it's done. There's nothing complicated about any of this stuff. And the thing about this is that, of course, Extinction Rebellion, The Fact, is a show that we've done that's had a lot of hits. And if you look at that on windowsontheworld.net, Extinction Rebellion, The Facts, it's linked to other shows we've done, and it exposes and explains how this is a corporate-backed and indeed working for a corporate agenda. And of course, it's all rolled out by what are called globalist interests. That's the whole point. So all of these people gluing themselves to things and lying down in Waitrose are actually working for their own enslavement. And that is something which the people who are at the top find incredibly funny, because if you go back to 1992, the Rio Earth Summit, they were really calling people like that. They weren't even calling them useful idiots. They were just calling them cattle, which is probably not a bad term if you are of that mindset. Let's think like people who have a intergenerational plan, you know. Now, getting back to more important things, cult leader Greta Thunberg was featured spouting repeated cliches by a reporter who not once asked her a question. Have you noticed this? That anybody who's pro-global warming never gets really challenged, but anyone who's anti-global warming gets hit with just a few cliches and then gets shut down. Now, the mini dictator was given full use of state TV to propagandise her baseless and factless rhetoric. Well, that's the truth, isn't it? The implanted rhetoric of her controllers. Now, this is a great example. When you try and confront people who are brainwashed, and brainwashed to this extent that they will believe the cliches that are spouted by this 16-year-old, you are up against a kind of totalitarian mindset. In other words, it's completely closed. However, the most important thing is that they don't have any facts. So I put this as a comment under this Associated Press video of Saint Greta the Great to see what response it got. I said, she has been given dictator status and is intolerant to facts. This is a death cult like no other. She is a danger to the world's population, backed by the population reduction specialists, the United Nations. The propaganda she utters compares to that of any murderous regime. Now, you can't. Well, it's not exactly restrained, is it? But I think we're past the time where we can be restrained about this kind of thing. So someone wrote back, 1, she has been given dictator status and is intolerant to facts. What? By quoting the IPCC? Well, I think that's fighting talk to anybody who knows what they're about. 2, they've numbered them, you see. 2, this is a death cult like no other. Quoting climatologists and meteorologists is now a death cult. Okay, you are sick, they put. Okay, so I've responded fairly calmly to this, and I said, well, my point was that she didn't quote any climatologists or meteorologists, and she said that she didn't in the video, right? So people respond with emotions to things that aren't even part of what they're trying to respond to. It's absolutely bizarre, this. I said she also stated she knew nothing about climate science, which she does, right? So I said, can you imagine any interviewer or on mainstream TV letting unchallenged statements or on any other subject, well, except maybe climate change and Israel, to go unchallenged, right? So there's a response, right? This is the response that I put after the points 1 and 2 here, right? I said, she doesn't quote scientists. She has never quoted a single proven fact. The IPCC is a lobbying group of the UN and not a scientific body. She has never quoted any peer-reviewed scientific paper and admits to knowing nothing about climate science. Apart from that, she is, of course, an expert. LOL, right? So then they've put back, okay, now go back to looking for the white tanks of the UN, amazed that you can even spell peer review. You see the childish little ad hominem that comes in here? So they can't actually back up anything that they've said. In other words, they can't respond to what the facts that you've just given. So I said usual ad hominem and non-response to fact. So no peer-reviewed papers or evidence for your claims to share, then thought not. Now, this sort of response is the norm from climate cult members. They use logical fallacies or appeals to inappropriate argument, which is what they're doing. They then follow up with ad hominems, and then they throw their toys out of the pram, and if they're on Facebook, they block you. That is the process that they go through. Now, this is the only response that the climate cult members are capable of. So these responses are very similar to those who have been indoctrinated into cults by so-called gurus. When asked about the qualities of the guru, they lapse into cliches or say that it is beyond words, right? This is something that's really, really common. When people talk about these gurus, they either come up with quotes that have been implanted in them by the guru, Or they say it's beyond words, or it's beyond consciousness, or some cliche rubbish like this, because they haven't got the mental capacity to actually use language. So some things are beyond words, but the charlatans and perverts who in the New Age cult call themselves gurus only tell their initiates what they think they want to hear. The hive mind is the hive mind, and it is protected by the rules of the hive and the terms used to describe it. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is because it's exactly the same as the climate change cult. All cults work in the same way. They work through brainwashing and the repetition of the cult members. That's all you need. You need people to repeat things. So when Greta Thunberg says our house is on fire, it doesn't really have to mean anything. And it, of course, doesn't mean anything, because there is no data or specific detail to back up anything she's saying. So this is the age of this sort of generalized soundbite. So anything true is negative, and anything intangible and subjective is positive. And the climate cult works in exactly the same way. Now, both the New Age and the climate cult are the psychological weapons of the UN, and anyone can research into that. I mean, we've done a show called New Age Global Governance. The UN General Secretary, Robert Mueller, recruited the New Age cults in the 1970s and gave them seats at the UN. Now, this is a clever move, as these cults acquiesce from personal responsibility, and they can easily be mentored into mental and physical enslavement as they concentrate on their own narcissism and basically their own self-empowerment through self-help, through groupthink. Now, this is the same technique, basically, you wonder where I'm going with this, the same technique is used by your local council. I always bring it back to local, you see. Those planning meetings that you go to, they use trained facilitators. They're getting you into a hive mind of groupthink, and anyone outside it is marginalised and cut out. Now, I've had this with these sort of guru types before. When they know you can see through them, they will turn other people against you, and they say, well, you're a negative influence and all the rest of it. Well, in this sort of respect, negativity can be very positive. Positive negativity, right? So, things that they think are negative are just true.
Yeah,
isn't it? Well, do you want to come in there, Sandy?
Well, no, it's true. I mean, we've encountered this recently. Is that anything that isn't going along with their narrative is then considered negative, and we're being just disruptive and negative, and it's really just because we don't agree with their narrative, and that's what they're doing. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to our show called Extinction Rebellion, The Facts, and we quoted the organisation's founder, Gail Bradbrook, who said, in social change theory, people react to emotions, not logic and fact. So this is the language and the psychology of the change agent. It's called the post-truth world, which was a quote that came out in 2016. I put that in my talk, because we are in a post-truth world. Appeals to emotion are more important than fact. And in actual fact, they have always been. When things are presented as fact, but actually are there to trigger emotion, which is the climate change agenda, then it's just very simple. But to some people, very clever psychology. To me, it's very, very simple. But we live in the post-truth and post-fact world. Now, this has been the job of think tanks, NGOs and their likes, and even Demos, the public policy think tank, who stated, get this, just have a listen to this quote because it sums it all up. The new democracy, see, I thought we had democracy. No, they were given the new democracy will work with a combination of government open infiltration and citizens groups taking direct action. So what are Extinction Rebellion? A citizen group taking direct action. They're not the citizens like you and me. This is a mentored program. And when the government say open infiltration, that happens everywhere. Now, what sort of government would admit to open infiltration of public groups? What sort of government? Have a think about what sort of government would admit to that. Because a real totalitarian government would probably keep it secret. But because it's called the big society and has to include everyone, the new form of totalitarianism is out in the open. And what you have to do is get everybody into the groupthink. And we're going to get onto this with this conference which was held earlier this year. And this was basically what the participants, well, basically, these are people who are making policy in your country. This is what they were saying. But let's have a quote now from Agenda 21, the document. This is your local action plan, and this is chapter 28. Each local authority should enter into a dialogue with its citizens, local organisations and private enterprises to formulate a local Agenda 21 through consultation and consensus building, which means that it will appear that you're getting a choice, but you're not. You're being mentored.
Yeah.
You're being steered into the intended outcome. Through consultation and consensus building, local authorities would learn from citizens and from local, civic, community, business and industrial organisations and acquire the information needed for formulating the best strategies. Now, what we're talking about here is not going to local businesses and local people. What they're talking about here is going to the people who are already mentored into the programme, because they're already in place in your so-called community. The vibrant community that you live in, the monoculture that you're being steered into. So it's the controlling of narrative at all levels. Global local governance rolled out through public-private partnerships, PR companies who control all local consultation and send out these surveys to get the right people involved and identify the troublemakers. And identify the key players and the decision makers, in other words, the useful idiots who are already mentored into this stuff. And then the change agents are in every organisation. Mega regions, another thing that we've talked about, mega regions, big, huge councils are being formed all over the country. Just check the mega regions of councils, Oxford, Buckinghamshire, up north. You look around, many councils are merging into one.
And they're moving it means that really they're moving the councils and the decision making further away from the people. So you're going to have regional mayors, and you won't have a voice, basically.
That's
what
right.
It's moving all the decision making further away from the people, so they can't oppose it. Yeah.
Yes, it's a global project to find all these mayors that they're appointing to be part of this sustainable development plan. So when you're implementing a totalitarian regime, you have to cover every base, and you have to also have the system of parties. So in other words, you've got Labour, Conservative, but they're both implementing the policies of Sustainable Development Agenda 2030, as are the Greens. Now, the Greens are the eco-fascist group. So, well, fascism is not really the right word, but let's call it totalitarian. They're the totalitarian group. So they will be pushed more and more to the front and gaining more and more seats. And this is just called a system of parties. And also people get mentored into groups which are meant to appeal to their worldview. So this is all psychologically worked out, and it has been for a very long time through organisations like the Tavistock Institute. We've done many shows on that, actually, really interesting stuff, and how this filters down to the Cabinet Office and governance, and it goes into all media. So Associated Press and Reuters, Sky News, the BBC, all of this stuff that you see in mainstream is all coming from one source. It's coming from the source of places like the Tavistock, who then put it into NGOs and other think tanks, a bit like Demos, Policy Exchange. There's many of these. NGOs are the scourge of every country on the planet because they are the shadow government I'm talking about. When I went to Nepal recently, I was talking to a young bloke, about 22, this fella, and he was so switched on, very well educated, and I said, what's the worst aspect of what's going on in your country? And he said, NGOs. And he knew straight away. So how come a 22-year-old in a so-called third world country knows that, and a 22-year-old in the UK will glue themselves to something or lie in the road? I think it's to do with the fact that we live in a mollycoddled society which has no system of, let's call it awareness. Let's actually call it awareness of what is actually going on. But we've talked about these new centres of local brainwashing called community hubs. They replaced community centres. Do you remember community centres? Those places that are now deserted or closed down. We have a community hub now. And these community hubs are there to control the narrative of public opinion locally, and they're staffed at the front end by old people and volunteers. The voluntary sector is a huge part of this global governance. The controllers are pulling the strings, so nothing outside this communitarian, which is what they call it, communitarian state-controlled narrative, is allowed a voice. Well, true to form, the globalist-backed anti-globalist taxation enforcement team, aka Extinction Rebellion, have now realised they are getting slated for not being concerned about 5G, because that's the meme of the moment, right? True to form, they have opened a new community hub. This is what Sandy was referring to earlier on. So first, let's have a recap on how controlled opposition works, right? This is important. As I stated earlier, the globalists need the anti-globalists to steer their protests. The anti-globalists, rather, need someone to organise, fund and steer their protests. The anti-globalists implement the policies of the globalists. So, we know that Extinction Rebellion are a state-backed and globalist-backed organisation with links to the Internet of Things rollout, state and MI5-backed fake protest groups. Yes, I've proved all this, such as Reclaim the Power and Democracy Village. They say so themselves on their own website, okay? There's a fellow who's a director of Compassionate Revolution Limited, who was one of the people who was instrumental in removing Brian Hoare, the peace campaigner, and Barbara Tucker, who were protesting against the Iraq War, from Parliament Square and preventing any protest in Parliament Square. Just like this fake squat in the City of London, the Bank of Ideas stopped squatting in public buildings and promoted climate change. George Soros was backing it. George Soros, let me tell you, is backing Extinction Rebellion. We now have the documents to prove that from their internal documents. And Soros made the contribution directly to Gail Bradbrook. So ask Gail Bradbrook what her connection is to George Soros. Pretty important, I would think.
Very important.
This is from Gloucestershire Live, Sandy. This is the story that... I'm sorry I'm talking so much this week, actually. Because
that's all right. You've got a lot to say, Mark.
What I've done... See, what I did, I didn't think you'd be back today.
Oh, I guess.
So I prepared all this stuff.
It's okay.
But we can always go for another half an hour. You know?
No, it's really interesting stuff, because I'd heard about this this thing, in Stroud, where they're forming an Extinction Rebellion group through XR. So. Yeah,
okay.
It's unbelievable.
So it's called, this is from Gloucestershire Live. Now, this live publication is run by a company called Reach PLC, who recently put a very libelous headline up, which they said they were covered to do, which they're not. Have a look at our show, a recent one. You'll find it really interesting. It's called Anti-5G Protesters Libelled by Press. Okay? Have a look at that. It's in our archive on YouTube and, of course, on BitChute. Please look at that, because it will tell you a lot about what's going on and how sinister what is going on actually is. In other words, if you are deemed to be outside the acceptable narrative of public opinion as enforced by your local Stasi, then you could be a targeted individual or group. But because we know a lot about this stuff, we've been able to nip it in the bud and, as I keep saying to everyone, claim the moral high ground. We've got the moral high ground. We've put a fence around it and a gate, and we're looking after it, and no one can get in at the moment. So that's all good. So this place that they've opened up, this is actually the headline in Gloucestershire Live: Extinction Rebellion to open headquarters with anti-5G campaigners in Stroud. Now, wait a minute. This is meant to be a protest group. If I set up an anti-establishment protest group, would it be in every newspaper, and would all of my protests be in the Daily Mail, the Independent and the Guardian? No, I don't think they would, really, would they? I think the state would be trying to avoid publicising what I was doing, which is why I don't understand how people don't get that this is an absolutely globally state-backed load of pantomime theatre nonsense.
Absolutely. They're just allowed to do whatever they like and not have anybody opposing them. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it says here, the Beacon is set to be a new centre for community activism. Now, this is straight out of the big society of David Cameron. Community activism is basically activism on behalf of your local governance. That's all it is. That's what they call community activism. It's not activism. It's actually...
And it's not community.
No, it's just activity, right? So it's going to be the new centre for community activism where they're going to monitor and control the narrative of what's going on. And if we approach them to put a talk on in there, I think I know what they'd say. It's extreme right wing. It's a conspiracy theory. I suppose you think Elvis lives on the moon. I suppose you think chemtrails are real. All this kind of stuff, right? So it says here, their partner, Stop 5G, now that this is partnered with Extinction Rebellion now, believe there is evidence that 5G is carcinogenic to humans and should be classified as a Group 1 carcinogen, along with tobacco smoke and asbestos. Extinction Rebellion are set to open a new headquarters in Stroud, the eco-warrior protest movement. No, please let's leave the word protest out of this. The useful idiot movement that aims to stop ecocide has paired with the Stop 5G campaign, which aims to expose the dangers in the rollout of 5G to create a new centre for community activism. Yes, folks, your new community hub for those who protest for and on behalf of their own enslavement, backed by the agents of change directing them. We have covered this subject for the last 10 years, so at least the template is the same. Okay, Stop 5G believe there is evidence that 5G is carcinogenic. Yeah, we've said all that, let me repeat that. This is, of course, being set up to be debunked by the same forces that set up the controlled opposition group in the first place. So what we're going to hear is that nothing to see here. 5G is perfectly safe. Gail Bradbrook's part of it. She promoted the Internet of Things through her associations with Citizens Online. And I did contact them a while ago and they told me all about that. They said she did leave. But these are people who go from NGO to NGO. This is how they make their living, ladies and gentlemen. They work for the community interest. They work for the common good. They work to take away all your rights and tax you to death. That's
and they're
what they work
in bed with all the tech companies, basically.
Yeah, the Internet of Things and the rollout of driverless cars.
Yeah.
Yeah, after ER being called out on their lack of concern about 5G and its millimetre wave technology, which is going to be beamed from every lamppost and smart bench in your borough, they now have to be seen to be taking action. Well, maybe there will be more die-ins at phone shops. A welcome change from Waitrose. The Beacon Centre, it says here, will open on Friday evening, August the 2nd. It is situated in the former Kendrick Street Gallery on the corner of Kendrick Street and Threadneedle Street. Marcus Blackett, who has been campaigning on environmental issues for over 30 years and is now closely involved in both organisations, conceived of the idea. If he's been involved in looking at real environmental issues, why the hell is he having anything to do with these clowns? That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
30 years is a long time. You think he'd cotton on, wouldn't you?
You would think he'd cotton on.
You would have thought.
He released the following statement. I saw the lease was for sale, and this is my contribution to addressing the environmental crisis.
Oh, it's like the Bank of Ideas.
Yes. Except that was a company set up a year before by a fellow in Argentina, and the signatory was someone called Daisy Golding out of 33 Fieldgate Street in Hackney, which is basically where they put all the anarchist groups, right, who work with the council, and where they monitor the activities of the so-called activists, you know. So basically, yes, let's see what he had to say. So he's seen this lease and he's bought it, and it's his contribution to battling climate change. That's a logical fallacy within itself anyway, isn't it? You know, how can buying a lease on somewhere do anything to help climate change? So, okay. He said, we need to build up our community's resilience. Oh, the R word.
Resilience. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Diversity's coming any minute now. Its capacity and its imagination. Now, these people do not have any capacity or imagination, so we should have just left that bit out. If we are to deal with what is approaching, this is all the mitigation fantasy, right? It's all about what if this happens? Well, as I said before, we're more likely to get hit by a comet or an asteroid, which would have devastating impact and effect on everything for years on end, right? And probably wipe everyone out. But what they're thinking is that the weather's going to change and get so bad and it's going to get so hot that we won't be able to live on planet Earth. Well, Actually, no, it's not the hottest July ever. It's nothing like the hottest July ever. Why do they keep lying about this? It's absolutely pathetic. The data goes back to the 1860s, right? There was one, I think there's one weather station. In the 1950s, there was 2 or 3, okay? The weather station data that they've got back has now been debunked. That's the recent report from the UN, the Special Report 15. The weather stations include weather stations which were closed in 1996. This is fraud. They've added 2.5 degrees to global temperature. These people will say you're conspiracy theorist. This is fact, and all you have to do is look it up. It's embarrassing that these people believe it. But he says we need to build up our community's resilience. To what? To the forthcoming apocalypse, of course. So his PR statement is in the words of the change agent, and he uses the cliches we've all got to know and despise. Well, if he has been looking into environmental issues, why is he going along with this template, as we said earlier? State protest group, Extinction Rebellion, why is he going along with that? Because I know a real environmentalist or two who are actually have been questioning ER from the very, very inception. And what they got back was responses from the inner core of this totalitarian organisation. They're called the Dragons. They had them at Occupy. Dragons are an integral part of any intelligence kind of organisation. What they do is they protect the inner core by using very vicious techniques and psychological attacks on anyone who actually gets in their way. And they had this at Occupy, and Occupy was the template for this nonsense, this new pantomime. So basically, all the evidence seems to point that this guy is just another useful idiot. But it says here, the Beacon will be a place where everyone can come and share their concerns.
Oh, yes, and we'll have facilitators and co-facilitators. And
well,
yeah,
sharing your concerns is basically, let's see it from their point of view. We're sharing our concerns, they're gathering intelligence.
Of course they are. Yeah.
That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
So the Beacon will be a place where we will gather intelligence and learn about what is going on and find out what you can do to resist and prepare. In other words, we're going to give you the template for your own protest. We're even going to give you the signs, and you won't be able to use any signs that we don't give you because they might be politically incorrect, right? This is the point. Everything has to be micromanaged, and that's what these places and people are for. Yes, they will be taught about citizens' assemblies, Delphi technique to run their meetings, and how to gain group consensus. We want everyone from 8 to 80 to monitor and indoctrinate into our controlled narrative where nothing happens and no one has a voice. That's what's going to be. That's what it's going to be, right? We have it for them on behalf of our sponsors. Basically, that's what it is. We have it for them. It's on behalf of our sponsors. Do come along and bring your friends. We have old people volunteering and pictures by little kids of the forthcoming apocalypse. I bet you they're going to do that, right?
God, that's dreadful.
No, they're
That's
going to have
child
them.
abuse.
No, but they're going to have pictures about climate change on the wall. I guarantee it, by 8-year-old kids, right? That's what they're going to do.
This is horrible.
I know they're going to do it because I've seen it before, right? Plus a few quotes from St. Greta the Great and words of wisdom plastered on the walls from the Thunberg School of Critical Thinking. Things like, our house is on fire. Basically like, deniers won't listen, you know. That's what she said, deniers won't listen. This is what this Greta Thunberg's been programmed to say. She's using the word denier, you know. I mean, I thought these sort of people with autism, like us, yeah, because we're all autistic now.
Of course.
We're on the autistic spectrum because we're the only ones who can see this. And the thing is that because they say that people with autism can really focus, what went wrong in her case, right? Because she doesn't look for any facts. She repeats exactly what she's told.
Well, she's a child and she's been brainwashed, sadly. I mean, the girl I feel sorry for her in lots of ways. She's just a kid that's just been completely brainwashed and she's spouting all the nonsense she's been given, and that's all she can do. She's like a machine.
Yes, and I thought it was child abuse to start with, but I'm now beginning to see in the eyes of Greta Thunberg, I'm actually seeing her turning into a mini dictator. She's actually getting really vehement about it. And angry. Yeah. And you can see that there's a malevolent look in the eyes of that kid.
I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
We don't like it at all.
Don't like it.
We don't recommend mentoring your children into the Thunberg School of Critical Thinking, ladies and gentlemen. Don't listen to hate. Well, that's anyone who challenges our fact-free propaganda straight from the UN.
No, that's the other way round.
Yeah.
I mean, you could reverse that.
That's right. You? Don't listen to hate. Yeah. Don't be negative. So basically, it says here, we are stronger together, and the beacon will be a place where collaborations can happen and ideas can spark and catch fire. What, they're going to burn it down?
Well, our house is on fire.
Our house is on fire. So maybe their house is going to be on fire. Maybe that's what it's going to be. Maybe it's going to be an insurance job, who knows? Controlling all narratives with intolerant drones, forcing the whole world into collectivism. Yes, collectivism.
Collectivism, yes.
The hive mind is the new activism. It says here, on the beacon's 3 floors, there will be space for classes, talks and workshops. Oh, a little bit like the banks of ideas then.
Yes.
I wonder what those talks and workshops will be on.
Yeah.
I think they might be mentoring people into climate change and the hive mind totalitarianism system.
They possibly will.
Do you think there's much chance of that? I think there is. A library. They're going to have a library. I wonder what's going to be in there.
Well, they did that in Occupy then.
Yep.
Yeah. It's the same template.
Yeah, and a gallery. Gallery.
Yeah.
Little kids' pictures. Like, our world is on fire, you know. While the ground floor will be a social space and a shop window for local and international campaigns. What it's going to look like, right? It's going to look like one of them drop-in squatty type places. And it's going to have a load of eco-hippies saying, yeah, come in, man, come in. And it's going to have those...
They're trying to be cool and trying to encourage people to come in. But it is actually corporate controlled underneath that facade. It's just ridiculous. Yeah.
Of course. Can you imagine the amount of brainwashed numbskulls in one place? No, not since the Bank of Ideas and Occupy, actually. Occupy was good to start with, but then it turned into...
Well, it got taken over. Yeah.
Facilitators, citizens' assemblies.
Dragons.
All the rest of it. Blackett says the aim is to create a space to foster new ways of thinking about the environment, about politics and about the community, and to encourage a drop-in culture for everyone interested in sharing ideas and making things happen. I think we need a few people to drop in and make things happen. That would be good, wouldn't it?
That would be good, yeah.
Yes. Okay, can someone try to book our talks on the real causes of climate change and the real agenda behind what they're doing in there, please? Can someone do that for us? Can we have a bigger picture booked into the Beacon in Stroud ASAP? We've got a few people in Stroud. Let's see what the reaction is.
They'd never let us do it, Mark.
But it's inclusive. I'm vibrant. I'm diverse.
Yeah, but you've got the wrong narrative for their Beacon.
But I could be trained.
If you're trained by them, you'll be trained by...
Our house is on fire. Whose sweets? Our sweets.
Our sweets.
Off our streets, fascist scum. Fascist scum, off our streets. I can do it. You know.
Well, yeah. Well, we could try, but I don't think they'd let us in there somehow. I think we need our own bank of ideas. We need.
We need ideas. We have ideas. They don't have ideas. They needed a bank to give them ideas.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, so it says here, the Beacon will be open daily with space to hire at rates designed to support all types of group and activities. So basically, control all the narrative of local activity. Yeah. Nothing else will be allowed to thrive. Right? Okay, then, let's see if they will host talks on free speech. Lol. PMSL. Meanwhile, the Greta Thunberg death cult has spread like a virus, and Greta has developed the air of a malevolent dictator. Now, this is what I was getting onto, right? This is the new face of genocide, ladies and gentlemen. She may be under serious external influence, but the dictator is now turning into something evil. Check out her latest speeches. They are beyond totalitarianism, as they are openly subversive. The adults who will not listen must be made to listen. Our house is on fire. All right, it's their house, it's her parents' house, but not for long. The UN and World Bank will take all their property. And I will be head of the new global world order. Yes, me, Greta the Great. My name is an anagram of great, so I must be destined for Gretaness, right? Okay. I pull that out earlier.
Did she actually say that?
No, I'm putting words into her mouth. Well, everyone, well, the UN are putting words into her mouth, so why can't Windows on the world?
Yeah, no, true.
You know,
true.
Let's be diverse here, you know. But Greta hit out at the grown-ups recently, right, getting back to St. Greta. This was in The Guardian. Greta Thunberg hits back at Andrew Bolt Revolt for deeply disturbing column. The campaigner calls out hate and conspiracy claims. Oh, sorry, let's see. Greta calls it hate and conspiracy campaigns. No, he asked her a question. After Australia's attack, you see, it's an attack now because it's on a 16-year-old kid. It's an attack.
Yeah.
Mocking Greta Thunberg. Leaves autism advocates disgusted. Okay, this is on Thursday, 1st of August from the Guardian, our favourite newspaper.
Comic.
It's not that good. The teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg has hit back at the Australian News Corps columnist Andrew Bolt for writing a deeply offensive column that mocked her autism diagnosis. Well, he didn't actually. That's not what he did. But never let the truth get in the way of a good propaganda issue, right? The widely read Herald Sun columnist and Sky News commentator used his significant platform to take aim at the 16-year-old campaigner, dismissing her followers as members of a cult and disparaging her decision to sail across the Atlantic in a high-speed racing yacht to attend UN climate summits in the US and Chile. Thunberg, it says here, Thunberg has announced she's finally going to the United States. This is what he said. The last bastion of the heathen, to preach the global warming faith to the Americans, Bolt wrote. Of course, she's going by racing yacht because she refuses to fly and heat the planet with an aeroplane's global warming gases. Now, wait a minute. That doesn't sound like what they've said. He said at all, right?
No.
So that's not an attack.
That's not hateful.
Well, it's not an attack.
It's quite funny.
It's a statement of fact, right?
Yeah.
So how can it be an attack when it's true?
Yeah.
The high-profile columnist for Rupert Murdoch. See, they use they kind of disparage it as being Murdoch press when it fits their agenda, which ironically is Murdoch's agenda.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Control all narratives. The Sky News commentator attacked the 16-year-old as deeply disturbed, which it is, right? Freakishly influential, which it is. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievably influential because you would not believe that could happen. Mm-hmm. But when you know how these people are promoted and what was behind her, a PR company in the United Nations, then it all falls into place. So it's not freakishly influential. Mm-hmm. It's corporate. It's a corporate influential. That's what it is. And strange. So he's used words like deeply disturbed, freakishly influential, and strange. Thunberg responded on Thursday, turning Bolt's words back on him. Well, she didn't actually, and says she was deeply disturbed. Oh, so she said she was deeply disturbed. Right? Yeah, she says she's deeply disturbed by the hate and conspiracy campaign. So she's been just told to say that, right? That's a soundbite that's been implanted into her not very active brain. That's my opinion, by the way. It says, and she said it was run by climate science deniers. Now, she's never quoted climate science in her life. So how can she call someone a climate science denier? It says, but the column has provoked outrage amongst advocates for people with autism. Well, this is the identity politics world of virtue signalling nonsense, right? This is the cult of victimhood. While an expert, we've got an expert, have we? There's always an expert there, isn't there? Have you noticed that these experts, when you look them up, aren't really experts? They used to have them on Sky News a lot, didn't they? I like the intelligence experts, you know. It bears all the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda. You know what I mean? Why is that an expert? Do you know what I mean? All the hallmarks of Al-Qaeda turn into all the hallmarks of right-wing extremism. It's turned into that, right? Just because MI5 told the expert to say it. So how can he be a bloody expert, you know? Yeah. So, okay. Yes, it just shows absolute ignorance on this, and it's particularly cruel, said Nicole Rogerson, the Chief Executive of Autism Awareness Australia. Is that what they call a logical fallacy, that autism awareness? And it is also leads to misunderstanding in the wider community and his audience about what autism is. No, it doesn't, because he didn't mention autism, did he?
He didn't mention autism once. So
no.
Why is she suddenly becoming a victim about autism?
Well, this is what you have to do. You have to tag on your disability at all times, right? You know, it says, well, this is just obfuscation, a logical fallacy. It has nothing to do with the argument against the cult of Thunberg. The so-called attack was questioning why she was being wrong and over-promoted, and nothing to do with her so-called autism, right? Yeah. Nothing to do with it. As being wrong and brainwashed does not go hand in hand with autism. It doesn't, right? If she's wrong and she's brainwashed, that doesn't go in any way near to comparing it with autism when he didn't, right? Yeah, it's got nothing to do with it. So basically, it carries on. I'd ask Mr. Bolt, does he think that no individual with autism can make a contribution to wider public discussion, she said.
Say that.
Now, this is absolutely typical of these vile, subversive creatures who jump on every bandwagon to dismiss and attack
and discredit
people.
Yeah.
Does he think that no individual, no issue, right? I think we're just reconnecting. Okay, that's okay. Yes, I thought we were losing it there. We're not losing it here, are we? No, we're still here.
Good.
Yeah. So if she's meant to be autistic, what happened in the case of Thunberg? She has no knowledge of the subject and questions nothing. She has let down those with autism and is an embarrassment to them and their unique abilities to isolate an issue without using belief and emotion over fact. There you go. I'm bigging up all the people with autism out there. We're on the side of you, and the Autism Association, whatever it's called, seems to be against you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They seem to be undermining people with autism.
Yeah.
Deliberately. Okay. So despite being 16 and looking 13, and despite knowing nothing about climate, and despite never doing any research into the subject, and despite never quoting any peer-reviewed data, and despite admitting she knows nothing about the climate, she is the go-to dictator for the climate emergency. Declared through Extinction Rebellion, right? St. Greta was recently seen in an anti-fascist T-shirt. Yes, Antifa.
What a surprise.
Wonder what would have happened if the T-shirt had said, climate emergency is white genocide. Just throwing that in, right? Now, can you imagine? She would have been compared with Goebbels' daughter. She'd have been the neo-Nazi, evil dictator child.
With daughter, actually.
Yes, I know. Oh, you had to bring it up.
I
didn't
did
you?
have to bring that.
You had to bring that
I
one
had
up.
to.
You Nazi. Oh, that's terrible.
I know. I'm wicked.
She's only 16.
I know, poor kid.
It's terrible. Now, I do feel sorry for her in some respects, but what she's doing is dangerous, right? It's dangerous. So, but yeah. So European children are being wiped out by mass immigration. Imagine if she'd said that on a T-shirt, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Well, she wouldn't have been called out for what she actually is. But when you're doing the work of the UN and the World Bank, things can change, can't they, Greta? And you become an agent for change, a prophet, Profit.
Yes.
Things can happen, and the terminally dreary, who were destined for a lifetime of drudgery in state administration, like you, Greta, in a government office, are suddenly world leaders. The ones created by the UN and its NGOs, and of course pushed by her shameless celebrity, virtue signalling, deluded but narcissistic parents. A climate celebrity is born. Now that is a climate emergency, ladies and gentlemen. But the teenage dictator is getting more hate-fueled by the day, and the end is nigh, and financial autonomy will be a thing of the past, all thanks to the incoming legislation and control brought in by Greta and Extinction Rebellion. She calls adults who question her not so infinite wisdom hate-filled and laughs at them. This is the perfect example of a narcissistic personality fueled by her own delusion. Am I allowed to say that? No. Because this is Greta the Great, right? I used to blame the parents, but now it's up to the public to call time on this globalist puppet. The media report everything she says without a single question on her sources. This is post-truth, post-news and post-thinking. That's what it is, isn't it?
It is. It's post-brain cell.
Yeah.
It is, really, yeah.
And when her wisdom is questioned online, a surge of hate-fueled abuse appears, and her followers have a lot in common with her. They cannot state a single source or scientific paper, as we've proved tonight. Yeah. They just hurl abuse and accuse people of being what they themselves are, deluded and immune to facts. So anyone who criticises the propaganda of the dictator is shamed and shunned by the collective. Now, getting back to Extinction Rebellion, they are not very secure with their data, and we have already had inside information about who was getting paid what, which was left hanging around on the internet. We've done a show on that. Go to Extinction Rebellion, the facts. We've also exposed their inner core of dragons, as we said earlier, and their sinister Orwellian newspeak, and childish but sinister threats which they dish out through people who call themselves Dragon Tango and Dragon Echo. That doesn't sound like the police, does it?
No.
New documentation has now emerged, though, showing donations to ER, including George Soros. So Gail Bradbrook needs to be questioned on this,
yep.
As the contact with Soros is through her. Remember that the Soros-backed Occupy movement had an identical structure to Extinction Rebellion, including the dragons and general assemblies. Okay? And finally, the end of the world has just been announced. We'll finish with this because it's a bit of light entertainment. Climate crisis takes centre stage at Edinburgh Fringe. Well, who would have thought, eh? Extinction Rebellion, whose activists brought cities to a standstill in April, are among those appearing at the festival. This is from Sky News, Friday, 2nd of August. Improvised comedy, pathetic fallacy. Now, that's great, isn't it? Because they've completely done themselves in with that. That's great. It actually describes perfectly what they are. Yeah. A pathetic fallacy. Yeah. It's pathetic and it's a fallacy. Yeah, good thinking. Looks at our changing relationship to weather. Okay, well, the title's great, but I think they might be saying that their fallacy is real. Okay. Climate change isn't a laughing matter, they say. It's one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. Yet the crisis figures strongly at this year's Fringe Festival. Leading the creative and comedic call to action are rebel activists from Extinction Rebellion. The movement, which brought cities to a standstill with its protests back in April, has been given a residency at key Fringe venue Summer Hall. I wonder who paid for that. Who should be ashamed of themselves, right, this venue, and closed down due to their controversial, dangerous opinions. It says here, curator, artist and activist Natalie Taylor is hoping the group can connect with audiences in a new way. One of the things for me about art is that it can reach emotional levels that perhaps a scientific report can't. Well, she's just said it in one.
It's all about emotions and not facts.
Well, it is a logical fallacy then. Exactly. So she just said it. So in other words, we're appealing to emotion. We're not going to talk about science because that's above us. We have narcissistic and tiny brains, but we want to be seen to be doing the right thing. We want to be on the right side of history, but more than that, much more than that, we want to get our faces in the paper and we want a series on the BBC. Yeah. Okay? So, another from the Gail Bradbrook and Greta Thunberg School of Critical Thinking there. That's activist Natalie Taylor, who's saying that art can reach emotional levels that scientific reports can't. Okay, I think we've heard enough of that. She says, in a sense, I hate it when they do that as well, in a sense, or I'm feeling. Yeah. No, let's have the facts, please. Yeah. Not how you're feeling, not your little emotional bubble that you're in every day of the week, all wrapped up in your own little autistic world.
Let's come down to the real world, shall we? Yeah.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be good.
In a sense, I think people can become quite numb to hearing all the bad news.
Oh dear, we're negativity again, aren't we?
Oh, we don't want to be negative. No. And I think that sometimes if an artist is trying to explain the same information to you, it comes across in a different way. No, what it does is it doesn't come across at all because they'll do a picture or they'll make a statement or do an installation in an art gallery that's got sod all to do with the title, right? There's been a load of these things. It's fact-free and laughable. Okay. It says throughout August as well as an exhibition featuring artists which include Turner Prize nominee Monster Chetwynd, a range of documentaries will be shown. I'll bet the Al Gore one will be in there, won't it? And performances will be staged, inviting the climate campaigners to curate. I hate that as well when they're curating something. It just means you're standing in talking bollocks, basically, right? Curate your own programme at Edinburgh. I'm done with this now. I'm done.
Don't beat about the bush, Mark.
I'm out
just
of here.
Say it how it is.
Yeah. Their own programme at Edinburgh might seem like an unusual choice, but art and design has proved to be an incredibly effective tool for galvanising public support for the movement. Yeah, because it's all about propaganda and bloody brainwashing. I mean, it's just unbelievable stuff. So much so, it says here, that the V&A recently announced it has started gathering objects from the group's protests for their own collection. So, empty tubes of superglue and banal slogans are on show at the V&A. Well,
oh my God.
The overthrowing of all sovereignty was Queen Victoria's fault. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Look into it. I'm going to let listeners look up that one for themselves.
The overthrowing of all sovereignty was Victoria's fault by letting the Rothschilds into Parliament.
Yeah.
Well,
did you know that?
There you are. No, I didn't know that, but I knew that they came into Parliament around that time.
That's right. It was so. Because Victoria was really into the concept of British Israel, which is why we joined at the hip with Israel. Very interesting, but that's for another show. But it says, although global warming is a serious business, comedian John Long believes the doom and gloom of what's ahead might be best served with a dose of... Can you imagine what this is going to be like? Read it and weep. He wrote his stand-up show, Planet Killing Machine, whilst working at a recycling plant. John Long wrote his stand-up show, yeah. He said comedy can help sneak in facts about climate change. Well, they've already said we're not going to have any facts, so we're going to sneak in some facts, are we?
Yeah.
What, like it's crap?
Yes,
and it doesn't exist?
Exactly.
Are these the facts you're going to sneak in?
What if we decided to do a show here in this town about the real facts? I mean, we wouldn't get any funding, would we, from the Arts Council or whoever's funding this?
Of course not. No, but that's the whole point.
That's the whole point.
If you're outside the narrative of controlled public opinion, you don't exist.
Yeah.
You know, this is why 100 million people disappeared. You know what I mean? Look that one up. Yes. This is why people get starved to death, because they're outside the narrative of public opinion. We're not going to go into the Bolsheviks and all that, but do look all that up, because that's where this is going.
Yeah,
they're just putting a very polite face on it. They're putting a disempowered face on it. That's what they're doing. The fact it's so serious is one of the factors why we put off talking about it quite a bit, he said. So you're another kind of basically politically correct, vacuous numbskull who probably talks about his relationships. You know, when comedy, they go, oh yeah, they talk about their relationships, and it's like they're the most boring comedians because they never address any issues. And that's what a friend of mine had the comedy cafe actually, and he actually closed it down. Do you know that? Because he said no one comes to watch comedy anymore. He said they don't really want it.
There's no humour.
There's no humour now.
Yeah.
He says the fact that it's happening in the future. We can't... Now, wait a minute. Does this make any sense to you? This is a direct quote from this so-called comedian. The fact that it's happening in the future, we can't really think about it. It's a non sequitur. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
Can this person write a punchline? Well, let's see. So it's happening in the future. That's not only a logical fallacy, but it's another quote from the Gale and Greta Academy of Critical Thought. At least he says we can't really think about it, which in his case is obviously true. He says comedy can be quite a good way to sneak in a few... Yeah, we've had all that. Improvised comedy, pathetic fallacy. Yeah. You know, are you going to see this, ladies and gentlemen? It says if climate change is a palatable narrative, then we're not going to change our habits. It's only really by encountering something that we feel the hugeness of what we have a chance to make the huge changes that need to be made. These people are bleeding illiterate. What's the matter with them?
Yeah.
We're straight out communist era propaganda anyway. He should get his own show on the BBC, and he probably bloody will. He could take over from David Attenborough with statements like that one. Arguably, the biggest challenge at Edinburgh will be persuading audiences that they can't just be passive, that tackling our ecological emergency requires us all not to watch, but to act. So, Edinburgh, though, as a final thought, is a place where rapid climate change happens. It goes from global warming to bloody freezing within seconds.
And it will get colder.
That's about it for us from tonight. We're going to look at more about this global summit, and I've got some quotes that are absolutely chilling, which will back up our strange conspiracy theory about global governance. It was called the World Government Summit 2019, and there's a video on YouTube. This could be your homework, everyone out there.
We should set homework every week,
I think
Mark.
we should.
I think we should. And if you don't do it, you sit on the naughty step. Yep.
Well, yes. If you don't do it, you get to listen to next week's show.
yes, that's your punishment. Yeah.
So it's called World Government Summit 2019. Look at this video. It's called Enablers for Achieving Agenda 2030. And we're going to get onto that in the next show. I'm going to do a special on that, and we've got lots more to come. So thanks for listening, everybody. Sorry, Sandy, that you didn't get too much of a word.
No, that's all right. No, it's all right. It was good to listen to what you've been, looking at this week, because I've been having a great time at a festival and doing talks, obviously, but it's really nice to come back to reality and the show, and it's great. Thank you.
And there's more talks to come. I'm going to announce them very soon. In fact, we're running a bit over time, but... let's have a look.
We've got Carmarthen next.
Yes, we have. Yes, I'm just having a look at some of the quotes. Monthly Blimpton's been very busy there, actually. Yes.
Eric? Is Eric
BBC Radio 4 is retarded. It's official. I listened to a programme about how... It's gone now. Has it gone? It's because people are putting more comments and it's jumping around. Yeah, yes, BBC Radio 4 is retarded. It's official. I listened to a programme about how to brush your teeth and toothbrushes. It was like listening to Play School. Well, if you will listen to the BBC, you get what you deserve.
You will become infantilised because that's their job.
Yes, that is the agenda. So let's just go back to the homepage of Windows on the World. Now, we've got talks coming up. September the 8th in East Sussex. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, that's in Polegate in East Sussex. We're at a festival, which is a kind of small but friendly little festival, very eco, and we're doing our bigger picture talks because we've been asked to, which is very encouraging because people are listening. And I was getting a lot of Green people that were actually members of the Green Party who are beginning to see through the fake Green nonsense. And this is, I'm sure, which is what's going to be happening at this little festival we're going to be at in Polegate.
So that's great. So there'll be more people banned from the Green Gathering in years to come.
Yes.
Me and Piers started something. Look at that video, banned from Green Gathering. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And read the letter that we wrote to them after what they'd sent to us. It's all the stuff we've been talking about tonight and more. 15th of September, Bosom. Tell us about that one, Sandy.
I don't know much about this one,
okay.
Mark, to be honest. I know it's in Bosom, and Bosom's a lovely sort of boaty place in West Sussex, I believe, near Chichester. And I do have quite a few friends that live there, actually, and I don't know whether they'll be coming because I don't know whether they listen to the show. But, it's a small... Obviously, there's a group of people that want us to come and talk, which is wonderful.
We're going to be speaking at the local community hub. I can't wait to control the narrative, can you?
Exactly.
On the 21st, we're in Saffron Walden in Essex. That's all day, and that's going to be announced very soon. I was speaking to the lady who's putting it on today. She's very enthusiastic about it, and that's going to be great. It's going to be a little hall in Saffron Walden.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one because I've got an old friend of mine, Rick's Pike. If you're listening, it'd be really lovely to see you there. Looking forward to that one. That should be good.
Yeah, October the 5th, Cheltenham, Gloucestershire. More details on that to be announced. That was Gwyn who put that on, who was at our talk in Swindon.
Great.
So it's kind of gathering a bit of momentum here. And that's about it from us for tonight. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
I've got so much more to share with you. So do your homework and come back next week. Thanks a lot, everyone. Good night. Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.